On this Native Report, we highlight a nonprofit cycling group working with those of Indian country to bring the Ojibwe language to its trails.
When we talk about consulting in good faith, this, with the cyclists of Gitchigumi Shores and Fond du Lac, Nagachuanang, was an example and a model could be for respect and good consultation.
And we talk with a record-breaking Ojibwe ultra-distance cyclist who is often leading the pack on her bike and in her life's work.
Plus, we hear from those of the United Nation on the legacy and influences of Native people in the sport of football.
We also learn what we can do to lead healthier lives and hear from our elders.
Production for Native Report is made possible by grants from the Blandin Foundation, Anishinaabe Fund, and Alexandra Smith Fund, in support of Native American treaty rights, administered through the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation.
Welcome to Native Report, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Ernie Stevens.
Thanks, Ernie. I'm Rita Karpinen. In this episode, we're exploring stories of those who are going the distance in sports, from biking to football. And we shine a light on those working with Indian country to illuminate the Ojibwe language.
We'll start with our language-focused story. We visited with those of the cyclists of Gitchigumi Shores to learn about their partnership with the Fond du Lac Band in the city of Duluth. They work together to incorporate the Ojibwe language into their signage along the Mission Creek mountain bike trails.
Anishinaabe Aking. Aki is the land, the earth. Anishinaabe is original people. So indigenous means one connected to the lands. Akoe, Guizan, Sindigo, Ojibwe Mong, Bishon and do dam. Nagachuanang and doon Chiba, Kwaba Iganing in da Nungum. In the Jigi Canemy go Ricky Defoe. I work for Fond du Lac, Nagachuanang in the language department. I think it's through relationships that things are formed that are long-lasting. Anishinaabe is original man, so that includes the other nations that were here also.
My name is Pat Colin, and I was a Fond du Lac, not a Fond du Lacer, but I raised my kids in Fond du Lac neighborhood, so my home was just right down the street. And so I've been involved with COGS since they've started, and on the trail crew since the Mission Creek trails were first being put in. I taught high school science on the Fond du Lac reservation at the Ojibwe School. I had the privilege of traveling to Indian country across the U.S., in particular Albuquerque, Anchorage, and Phoenix. And I was always amazed that when we landed in airports there that you could tell that you were in some type of Indian country just by the architecture, the artwork, the sculptures that were there. But it wasn't like that landing back in Minneapolis or Duluth. And I was working with Hansi Johnson, who is a big COGS supporter and probably one of the main reasons why we have trails here in Duluth. And we were actually doing trail maintenance just right up the street here. And he was talking about some of the trail names that people had been mentioning might be good for this area. One was Wild West. Another one was Captain Slaughter. And he thought, how inappropriate. And he said, maybe we should have Native American names, or just names that are more appropriate for the people that live here. I took that idea and kind of ran with it. And so I thought we need some expertise here, so.
Is the bike. When we talk about consulting in good faith, this, with the cyclists of Gitchigumi Shores and Fond du Lac, Nagachuanang, was an example and a model could be for respect and good consultation.
I think we can use this model, for naming other things in our communities. So the trails on the east side of Mission Creek, those had names before I started thinking about having Ojibwe names for them. The ones on the west did not. So I believe that Ricky took these names and used the equivalent in the Ojibwe language. But then the ones on the other side, those were named directly from the Ojibwe. There's no, it was not translated.
Amik wachebat is Amik wachebat is so this a beaver, Amik wachebat is someone who has a lot of pep and a lot of spry. And of course in the English it could be used as ninja, which has a stealth meaning to it, but is also very energetic in things. So we translated those things in this way. First you put it in English, and then you put it over into Anishinaabe-Moan. And there's a problem with that because we're trying to put English into Anishinaabe-Moan. So it should be the other way around. We're working towards thinking Ojibwe first.
So what we're doing today is we're going to install a map kind of at the primary entrance to the trails. This is going to be the first map you see as you arrive at the trail system. And then we'll be installing a couple of other trail names. Maybe the simplest name we have, but maybe the most important, we're going to install the name on the Indigenous Land Trail. And this is the first time now all the key players that were involved in this are able to gather, and we're going to install one of the maps together. And it's really satisfying, it's really rewarding. So my role here is I'm the trail steward for the Mission Creek Trail System, and that essentially means that I'm kind of the go-to person for coordinating any volunteer work that happens out here if we're trying to build a new trail, perform seasonal maintenance. We got the trail names approved in 2020. We added those names to all of our online maps, all of our databases, and then a team of volunteers was able to get to work on doing the GIS work to create these maps. And in July 2021, we had a team of volunteers meet and install all the maps.
So incrementally, we're doing things to incorporate the language, indigenous language, into the region. Language then is used as a way to bring about some reconciliation, of the past, the harms that have been done to the Ojibwe people in this region, and the great, we recognize the Cree Nation, we recognize the Assiniboine Nation, we recognize the Dakota Nation, those great nations that were here before us. So there's many harms done in the way of race relations and the power structure in the United States through colonialism. So when we work towards reconciliation, we want to remember those things, but we look for the greater good of the people and to change a collective consciousness of a people. We were consulted in a good way with a good faith and being a part of something that's a win-win for everybody.
Tribal speakers were instrumental in incorporating Anishinaabe names into the signs. Ricky Defoe says this is a good example of an organization including Native people themselves when working on language preservation efforts.
Now to an Ojibwe woman who's going the distance. We introduced to you a Fond du Lac band member who won the women's field back-to-back in the 2018 and 19 Tour Divide races. The race is 2,745 miles. I sat down with her to learn what hurdles she's overcome to become the ultra-distance bike racer she is today.
I work really hard to do this.
So no, it didn't come easy. It's hard.
No, it's really hard, and there's like tons of sacrifice that I've made to be able to do this. I started biking about 10 years ago. I started commuting from my house about 10 miles away from my job, and it took me 2 hours to go 10 miles to get to work. And then I got a job as a Jimmy John's sandwich delivery girl, and then I got a job as a bike messenger. When you turn it into a job, like, I had to ride in all seasons, all weather, rain, snow, sleet, wind, like everything. And then I started bike touring, got a job as a bike mechanic, and then I started racing. I kind of got this desire to bike tour. I wanted to travel and see the country. Didn't have any money to do that, but I did have a bike. I did have some basic skills on how to fix my bike. So I set out for my first bike tour across the country, and that first one started in Madison, and then I rode up here to the Fond du Lac Reservation to visit my mom, and then from there I rode out to Boulder, Colorado. And it was exhilarating, and I just wanted more. I started bike touring every year. Bike touring can literally look like a million different things, but essentially it is starting on your bicycle with everything that you need to have, like your food and your camping gear and your clothes, attached to your bike via bags or straps or however you strap it onto your bicycle. And then you ride that bike to some destination and you create your route, and there's like, you can use paper maps, you can use mapping services online.
So you went from bike tours to doing bike races. When did you realize that, you were winning these races and this could be, something more?
The very first race that I thought I was trying to do was in 2017. I was like, I'm going to race the Tour Divide. And I was living in Tucson, Arizona at the time, going to college. And I thought that I would start riding my bike from Tucson all the way up to the start of the race in Alberta, Canada, and then race back down. So I thought I'd be in like really good shape from 2 months of touring or however long I had planned. I didn't realize that in traveling north that I would spend all of my savings, that all of the parts on my bicycle would wear out after 3,000 miles of riding my bike. And by the time I had made it to Alberta, I was pretty much out of resources. I had like $200 and I was like, I can still do this. And I set out to race back down to Mexico. And I think it was like 3 days in, I totally quit. I was like, this is way harder than I thought it was. I'm not prepared. The amount it crushed my soul not to do something I said I was going to do ate at me. So I decided that I would do 8 races in my 28th year of life to get redemption and kind of like prove myself to myself. I continued training and bike touring and then lined up at the Tour Divide again in 2018, just trying to finish. Like, all I needed to do was finish this thing. I didn't care how fast I went. I wasn't trying to win. Like 5 days into the race, I was leading the women's field. Winning that one race changed my life. All of a sudden people were like, who is this person? I'm enrolled in Fond du Lac, and now I live on the Fond du Lac Reservation in Cloquet. I applied for a fellowship, proposed my own project, and I got to stay here. Part of the project that I proposed to the organization hosting my fellowship was building a bike collective, which would essentially be like a community bike shop where people could come in, work on their bikes, learn how to fix their bikes, etc. My project originally started as this collective, and now it's kind of transformed into this project I call Ditibisse, which means to roll. So now it's this idea of a nonprofit rooted in experiential learning, which allows us to teach how to use these things, teach where you can use these things, like bikes, skis, snowshoes, kayaks, whatever, but create a place where we have all of this equipment, taking those lessons that I've learned on the bike and applying them to everyday life through experiential learning, I think can help a lot of people in our community succeed. I want all the people who might not even know about this to have access to it.
Most recently, Alexandria was the first woman to complete the 2021 Colorado Trail Race. The race features 500 miles with elevation gain through the Colorado Rocky Mountains between Denver and Durango.
Bursitis is inflammation of the fluid-filled sacs that cushion joints. There are approximately 160 bursae in the body. They prevent bones and muscles and tendons from rubbing together. This is an amazing system, and if it goes wrong, pain, swelling, and stiffness are the result. The most common sites for bursitis are in the big joints we use all the time. These are the shoulders, elbows, hips, and knees. Bursitis is a relatively common condition, especially after age 40. It can happen from repeated movements with activities like raking, gardening, shoveling, carpentry, and painting. Sports such as golfing, tennis, throwing, skiing, and running can cause bursitis. Not warming up before exercise or sudden injury are sometimes inciting events. Sometimes sitting or standing for a long time can cause it. As we age, tendons lose some of their elastic strength and are easier to tear. Conditions such as gout, rheumatoid arthritis, or thyroid problems can increase the risk of bursitis. Pain is the most common symptom of bursitis. Fever, redness, or swelling could be signs of an infection or other problem that needs to be treated urgently. If you get symptoms of bursitis, avoid activities that make it worse. Rest and elevate the affected area. Use crutches or a cane if needed, and use ice or cold packs. I advise keeping a few quart freezer baggies filled with unpopped popcorn in the freezer. They mold to fit any joint and they stay cold for about 20 minutes and are reusable again and again. My mother always said popcorn kept in the freezer popped better anyway. Take over-the-counter anti-inflammatory medicines like ibuprofen or naproxen. You should see your healthcare provider if you don't get better in a week. You might need x-rays and lab tests to better define this. Steroids might be needed, either as pills or by injection. Physical therapists are healthcare professionals and can help strengthen muscles and restore range of motion in joints. As always, remember to call an elder. They've been waiting for your call. I'm Dr. Arnie Vainio, and this is Health Matters.
We talk with members of the United Nations about their tribal nation's history of involvement in the Green Bay Packers as well as other NFL teams.
And illuminate the roots of natives in the NFL and the sport of football in general, especially with Carlisle boarding school football team's history of achieving greatness.
One thing I've done, and I've done well, I just really love to hit people. I mean, not viciously, but very, in a very devoted fashion. They were there and they did not belong there in front of me. They need to be over there. So I just helped them get to where they needed to be. When high school was done, I was All-State, All-American. I was offered 9 scholarships in Division I schools. I went to University of Oklahoma under Bud Wilkinson. That was the first year in 1961 they had black players. And my God, those 4 guys, they just crucified them. And for me, now I'm an Oneida Indian. And, you know, they would say, David, you don't look Indian. You don't have to tell anyone you're Indian. No one will know if you don't tell them. I said, I'm not raised that way. I know about it, and therefore you're going to know about it too. And I was drafted by Kansas City in the AFL, number 17. And I was drafted number 17 in the New York Giants in the NFL. So I ended up with New York. I figured out that in the histories of the Oneidas that helped start Green Bay, I was, I believe, the only Oneida ever to play against Green Bay.
When the game of football first came to Green Bay, there were a number of players that were paid professionally to play, and among those players were Oneida tribal members. We had a Skenador, a Wheelock, a Metoxen, and those men learned to play in Carlisle, and they were very adept and skilled at running, catching, and athleticism. They were the first really professionally paid football players in Green Bay. That was even before they became the Packers. The Oneida Nation has 24 monuments that are surrounding the east side of historic Lambeau Field. And 12 of those monuments are tributes to great Green Bay football players such as Bart Starr, Brett Favre, Reggie White, Fuzzy Thurston, as well as there are tenets that are important in our culture. The Oneida Nation values honesty, integrity, valor. Those are some of the tenets that are a tribute to all those different cultural values that we share with a legacy between Green Bay football and the Oneida Nation. And each of those monuments also has some historical significance written about our culture, about our language, about our history.
My name is Art Skinnerdor, and I am a descendant of Martin Wheelock. Martin Wheelock was one of the players that played on the Carlisle Industrial School, and then later on was one of the contributing members to the first semi-pro team of the Green Bay Packers. Well, Carlisle was a boarding school. It's in Pennsylvania. They played all the way across the country. They were, in a lot of ways, they were an anomaly. They wanted to hear about them, but they not necessarily wanted to play them, because they were the all-stars of all-stars from across Indian country. One of the cherished memories I have is of Martin Wheelock Jr. Coming to visit us in Anoka, Minnesota, and sitting down and visiting with the family and pulling me aside as a young high school student and telling me the story of the contribution of Martin Wheelock as a Carlisle football player and the contributions that he made. And one of the things that he really emphasized was that at one point, Martin Wheelock was co-captain of the team with Jim Thorpe. And as we all know, Jim Thorpe has been looked at by the NFL as one of the greatest football players in the history of the NFL.
Football can be pretty damn tough out there. My father told me, he said, you know, when I go and play football with all these people in stadiums, and teams, he said, you know, you're an Oneida Indian. And he said, it's not just you that you represent the Oneida Indians. You represent everyone in that tribe. So whatever you do, that's what they're going to think, people looking at you. They're going to think that's what all these Indians do. And I said, wow, Dad, that sounds responsible. It sounds like a real heavy task. And he said, no, son. He said, you know, don't let that startle you. He said, you know, you've got special gifts. I said, what? He said, yeah, you have special gifts because you're an Indian. That's why you're an Indian. And he said, I said, wow, I feel pretty good now. And I got special gifts. And then I said, wait a minute, Dad, what are those gifts? And he said, when you need them, they'll be there for you.
We just illuminated the legacy of Native Americans in the sport of football. And here's a fun fact. The former NFL Oneida Nation football player we just heard from, who played for the New York Giants, also has a brother who played for the Los Angeles Rams.
I'm huge on education. I lived 19 miles from the reservation my whole life. My mother was enrolled here. My dad was from Boston. I don't look Native. I've got blonde hair, blue eyes, and fair skin, and people look at me like, you're Native. But I was never taught my history or my culture. My grandma was fluent, she never spoke it. And the boarding school area, when I first came on council, I attended a tribal state relation training. And I learned so much at that training and that was for state employees. That wasn't for tribal members. It was for state employees. It's mandated that they have that training. And it's like, oh my God, I never knew this. And had I known what I know now, I would have learned the language from my grandma. I would have learned the traditions, but because of the boarding school era and the things they went through to, like they say, kill the Indian, save the man, it took away all of that. So now we're trying to re-educate.
If you missed a show or want to catch up online, find us at nativereport.org and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram for behind-the-scenes updates. And drop a comment on social media if you enjoyed the show.
Thanks for spending time with your friends and neighbors from across Indian Country. I'm Ernie Stevens.
And I'm Rita Karppinen. We'll see you next time on Native Report.
Partial funding of this episode of Native Report is provided by the citizens of Minnesota through the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.